Hello, what time is it where you are right now? Type the hour in the comments.
You'd think growing up in a house with four people would make you feel less alone. But there's a specific kind of loneliness that digs into your skin when you're surrounded by your own family. The kind that teaches you early not to expect applause, even when you win, not to cry too loudly, even when it hurts, and to lower your voice when your younger sister walks into the room because all eyes will shift to her anyway. My name is Olivia Carter, and I've been the background noise in my own family for as long as I can remember. The forgotten firstborn, the one who got straight A's while her little sister got encouragement awards for showing up to practice. The one who organized surprise anniversary dinners while her sister got celebrated for remembering to brush her teeth on time. You might be wondering why I'm telling you this now, and I get it. We all have our family drama, right? But stay with me, because this story doesn't end in some wholesome holiday photo. It ends behind a high school gym with my sister in tears and my parents looking at me like I was the villain in a play they refused to admit they wrote. Growing up in upstate New York, in one of those towns where everyone still shows up to the 4th of July parade and where your last name still means something, image was everything to my parents. My dad, Tom, ran a mid-size insurance firm, and he wore a tie even on Saturdays, just in case a client happened to see him at the grocery store. My mom, Karen, and yes, the irony isn't lost on me, was the kind of PTA queen who brought homemade banana bread to meetings and never missed a chance to correct your grammar mid-sentence. Together, they were the couple everyone envied, polished, polite, perfectly in sync. And then there was Grace. Grace was born 3 years after me, and it felt like the minute she arrived, the whole house shifted around her. She had dimples that could buy her out of any punishment, allergies that required special attention, and a dramatic flair that could have landed her a daytime Emmy before she hit double digits. If I scraped my knee, I was told to walk it off. If she sneezed twice, she was rushed to the ER because it might be something serious. It was always might be something serious with her, and somehow that phrase turned into a kind of family religion. Now don't get me wrong, I didn't hate Grace. Hating her would have required energy I couldn't afford to spend. I just learned to work around her. If she wanted the front seat, I sat in the back. If she wanted red velvet cake for her birthday, we all ate red velvet, even though it made me nauseous. That's what you do when you're the responsible one. You adapt. You keep your head down, do your homework, babysit when needed, and when someone asks if you're okay, you say, yeah, of course. Because who has time to be the needy one when you're already the dependable one? High school was a blur of trophies and transcripts. I won debate championships, science fairs, even a regional writing contest. My parents clapped, sure, but in a way that felt performative, like they were checking off boxes in their own parenting spreadsheet. Grace, meanwhile, got her first tattoo at 16 and cried when our parents grounded her for a week. So naturally, she was ungrounded in 2 days. The excuse? She's going through a lot right now. The same phrase they never once used when I pulled all-nighters to maintain a perfect GPA or stayed home from parties to edit the school newsletter. It became a quiet understanding between me and the walls of our house. My job was to excel, not to be celebrated. And in some twisted way, I accepted that. I mean, what else do you do when the people who are supposed to notice you act like you're just furniture? I remember one winter night, junior year, I'd just found out I'd been accepted early to Princeton. I walked into the kitchen, my acceptance letter in my hand, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. My mom was frosting cupcakes for one of Grace's cheerleading fundraisers. I said, "Mom, I got in." She looked up, blinked twice, then smiled that tight smile she reserved for strangers at the post office. "That's great, honey," she said. "Can you grab the sprinkles? They're on the top shelf." That was it. No champagne, no hug, no "we're proud of you," just sprinkles. And if you think it changed that after that maybe they started seeing me, then you haven't lived my life. But I kept going. I finished top of my class. I got the valedictorian spot. I was selected to give the graduation speech. And still, I wasn't expecting a parade. But I did think, just once, they'd show up for me without having to be reminded. So the night before graduation, I texted both of them. Ceremony starts at 10. I'm giving the speech. My mom replied, just 3 words that I will never ever forget. We're exhausted. Sorry. No explanation, no apology, not even a fake excuse about car trouble or a business meeting. Just, we're exhausted. At first, I just sat there, staring at the message like maybe if I read it again, it would say something different. But it didn't. It never does it? The next morning, I put on my cap and gown. I curled my hair the way my mom used to do when I was little, and I pinned on my honor cords like armor. I smiled for photos with teachers and friends, accepted flowers from classmates' parents who barely knew me, but somehow still noticed my achievements more than my own family did. And then, as I sat in the bleachers waiting for my name to be called, I opened Instagram. There it was, a fresh post, a boomerang actually, my parents in white robes, clinking glasses of champagne by a pool, sun glowing off their perfect smiling faces. Caption, much needed family spa day with our baby girl. #self-care, #Grace deserves it. I stared at that post, my hands shaking, while the principal called out my name. And I smiled. I smiled so wide my cheeks ached. But that speech I'd written, the one I'd printed and triple-checked, yeah, I never gave that one. And you ever been so hurt, so disappointed, that the pain burns clean through the sadness and becomes something else? What would you do if the people who should be clapping for you were clapping for someone else? Again. I folded up the speech, slipped it into my purse, and started scribbling something new on the back of a lunch receipt. And when I walked up to that mic, with everyone watching, I didn't just say what they wanted to hear. I said what I needed to say. And I didn't care who heard it, because I was done being quiet. There's a kind of silence that wraps around your chest on days that are supposed to be loud. Not quiet like a Sunday morning or a snowy afternoon, but hollow in the kind of way that screams through your bones and makes your own footsteps echo too sharply in your ears. Like every part of your body knows something's missing, even if your mouth refuses to admit it. That's what the morning of my graduation felt like. Heavy, off-kilter, like I was playing a part in someone else's milestone, and the audience who was supposed to cheer for me had walked out of the theater before the lights even dimmed. I had expected disappointment, sure. It was practically the background music of my life. But I hadn't expected it to gut me the way it did when I stood in the bathroom that morning, staring at my reflection with the Valedictorian medal in my hand, and the echo of 3 words ringing in my head like a dull drum. We're exhausted. Sorry. They hadn't followed up. Not a call. Not a last-minute change of heart. Just silence, like their absence was as routine as a dentist appointment. Something to be noted but never dwelled on. Because my needs, my victories, were background noise compared to whatever Grace had going on that week. And that's when it hit me. With the kind of clarity that doesn't offer comfort but rather the raw, metallic taste of betrayal that leaves you both nauseous and wide awake. They didn't forget. They chose not to come. They knew what today meant. And still they chose something else. I got dressed anyway. I pulled on the white gown, pinned my cap in place, fixed my curls even though my fingers were trembling so hard I had to redo the left side 3 times. And I did my makeup with the kind of precision that felt like war paint. Not because I wanted to look pretty, but because I refused to look like someone who'd been crying in her room for the last 2 hours. I had practiced that smile for years. The one that says, I'm fine, without making anyone uncomfortable. The one that doesn't ask for attention, but also doesn't scream weakness. I wore it like armor, the same way I had at every parent-teacher conference they skipped, every school play they couldn't make, every award night where I smiled into the crowd and found nothing but empty chairs in the 3rd row. The school parking lot was already packed by the time I got there, filled with minivans and SUVs, adorned with balloons and window paint. Proud parents running around with phones held high, desperate to capture every second of a day that mattered, not just to their kids, but to them. And even then, I told myself I wouldn't let it get to me. I kept saying it in my head like a prayer, like a mantra, like if I repeated it enough, the ache would dull and the fury would soften into something I could manage. But then I saw Mr. O'Connor, my AP English teacher, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. And when he handed them to me and said, "I figured someone ought to get you flowers today," I almost lost it right there in the parking lot. I thanked him, voice cracking just a little, and hugged him longer than I probably should have, because in that moment, he felt more like family than anyone with my last name. I posed for pictures with classmates, signed yearbooks, laughed at bad jokes, and kept that smile locked in place like a mask glued to my face with sheer willpower. Because today wasn't about what I didn't have. It was about what I'd earned, and I wasn't going to let them steal that too. The ceremony began like they always do. Overly long, filled with the kind of speeches that are meant to be profound but end up sounding like recycled Hallmark cards. I sat with the top 10 students front row, the heat pressing down on us like punishment. And I kept my gaze forward, refusing to glance back at the crowd. I knew if I did, I'd start scanning for faces that weren't there, and I couldn't afford that kind of emotional hemorrhaging right before my moment. My name was called, and the applause was loud, enthusiastic even, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears, and the hollow thud of absence that no applause could fill. And then, just as I returned to my seat, my phone buzzed. I shouldn't have looked. I should have turned it off, stayed present, absorbed the moment like everyone kept telling me to. But curiosity is cruel when you're hurting. I opened Instagram. There it was, a fresh post from my mother. A photo, no, a boomerang, of course, because everything with Grace had to be cute and moving and carefully curated. My mom and dad, side by side in matching white spa robes, champagne flutes in hand, with Grace wedged between them like the prize in a family lottery I was never allowed to enter. They were poolside, grinning, glowing, the caption chirping out, "Much needed family spa day with our baby girl. #self-care, #Grace deserves it." It wasn't just the timing, it was the fact that they didn't even bother hiding it. That in their minds, there was no shame, no guilt, just indulgent joy at a spa while I stood alone in a crowd of other people's pride. That they saw today not as something to be there for, but something to skip. And publicly, no less. Because Grace needed pampering. Grace always needed something. My hands clenched so hard around my phone, I nearly cracked the screen. My vision blurred for a second, not from tears. I was past tears. But from something sharper, something far more dangerous. Rage. Not the loud, dramatic kind that breaks plates and slams doors, but the kind that creeps in quietly and starts rearranging the furniture in your soul, changing who you are and what you'll tolerate from this point forward. I reached into my purse and pulled out my speech, the one I'd written weeks ago, the one I'd practiced in the mirror until the rhythm felt like breathing. It was good, safe. It said all the right things, hit all the sentimental beats, thanked everyone who needed to be thanked. I looked at it, then looked down at the back of a crumpled lunch receipt I'd used as a bookmark. My hand moved before my mind caught up, and before I knew it, I was scribbling furiously, not even sure what I was writing, just letting the words pour out like blood from a wound that had been open for years. When the principal called my name to approach the podium, I stood slowly, speech in one hand, lunch receipt in the other, my face still wearing the same smile I'd put on that morning. But something had shifted, not just in me, but in the air around me, like the universe was holding its breath, waiting to see whether I'd do the expected or the honest. I walked up the steps. I took a breath, and I let the safe speech fall to the ground like something I didn't need anymore. The next 10 minutes weren't just about me. They were about all the things no one ever says out loud at moments like this. And I was finally ready to say them. There's a peculiar sensation that comes just before you speak a truth you've spent your entire life swallowing. A kind of buzzing stillness, like the air itself is holding its breath. Like your body knows you're about to tear something open that won't ever quite close again. And all your instincts, trained over years to keep peace and maintain appearances, begin screaming at you to stop, to smile, to be graceful, to be the bigger person just one more time. But standing there at the podium, staring out at the sea of faces, some half listening, some already checking their phones, and none of them, not one, belonging to the people I needed to see, something in me simply broke through that long-learned silence and demanded to be heard. And for once, I didn't push it back down. I began with a line so clean, so rehearsed. It could have come from the version of the speech I'd written weeks earlier. It's an honor to stand before you today, surrounded by classmates, mentors, and families who helped make this journey possible. But even as I said it, my voice was already changing, my cadence shifting, my tone flattening into something deliberate, measured, and so thick with irony it hung in the air like smoke after a kitchen fire. I paused, just long enough for those who knew me well to sense something was off. Just long enough to catch the flicker of recognition in a few teachers' eyes, and then I kept going, no longer speaking from the version of me that wrote that tidy, eager speech, but from the version that had been curled up on the edge of her bed the night before, phone clutched in her hand, heart ringing with a familiar, echoing ache. I said things I hadn't planned to say. I thanked every teacher who'd stayed late with me when I couldn't figure out a problem, even when my parents never asked how my projects were going. I thanked the cafeteria staff for learning my name, for always smiling at me like I mattered, especially on the days when I felt like I didn't. I mentioned the custodian who once found me crying in the library my sophomore year and just nodded quietly before leaving a box of tissues on the table. I thanked my best friend's mom for cheering louder than anyone when I won the science fair, because my own parents couldn't be bothered to attend. These weren't in the original draft. These were memories. Small, quiet kindnesses that I clung to like life preservers in a sea of neglect. And then, without changing my tone, without so much as a flinch, I spoke directly to the absence. I said, "Some of us know what it's like to celebrate alone, to look out into a crowd and not see the faces we hoped would be there, to smile anyway because that's what we've always done, to be told we're strong, but never to be asked how it feels to always have to be." You could feel the shift in the crowd, like a gust of cold wind had slipped under the tent, making everyone sit a little straighter, lean in a little closer, wondering where this was going. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. My parents weren't there, but half the town followed my mother's Instagram, and I knew word would spread faster than I could control. I didn't want to control it. That was the point. I was done protecting people who couldn't be bothered to protect me from years of invisible bruises, the kind that don't show up in photos, but live forever in the corners of your memories. I talked about favoritism, though I never used the word. I said, some of us grew up in houses where praise was rationed like sugar during a war, and you learned quickly that the louder sibling always got the last cookie, the biggest slice, the applause, the attention, and you, the quiet one, the studious one, the dependable one, you learned that love, in your house, was something to be earned, not given. My voice didn't tremble, not once. If anything, it grew steadier with every word, like I was finally remembering how to speak in a language I'd forgotten I even knew. Laughter rippled through the crowd, polite at first, then nervous, then genuine, because what I was saying was real. And everyone in that audience either knew someone like me or was someone like me. The invisible kid, the overlooked sibling, the one who carried the weight, who remembered every birthday and milestone, who stayed out of trouble and made life easier for everyone, and who never got the damn credit. And just when they thought the speech was done, just when I was about to thank the school again and offer some saccharine quote about new beginnings, I added one last thing. Something raw and unpolished, the kind of truth that leaves a mark. I said, we are not defined by who showed up for us, but by how we showed up for ourselves when they didn't. And if no one else tells you today, I'm proud of you, I'm proud of us, not for being perfect, but for surviving what no one else ever saw. Silence, not the kind that follows polite applause, but the thick, stunned kind that hovers in the space after something honest has been said out loud, in a place where lies usually live. I stepped back from the podium, handed the principal the microphone, and walked off the stage with my head high and my hands steady, not because I felt triumphant, but because I felt clean. Like for the first time in years, I had rinsed something out of my soul that had been rotting in the corners far too long. What I didn't expect, though, was the way people looked at me afterward. Not just my classmates, who clapped harder than they probably should have, or the teachers who pulled me aside to say how much it meant to them, but the parents. The mothers with tight smiles and eyes suddenly too glassy. The fathers who patted me on the back like I'd said something on behalf of their own silent kids. That speech wasn't just mine. It belonged to every person who ever sat in the passenger seat of their own life while someone else drove straight past their achievements. But it was Grace's face I kept thinking about. Because even though she wasn't there, even though I hadn't said a word about her, I knew she would hear about it before the reception even ended. And while my parents might brush it off, spin it, pretend it was just me being dramatic, Grace would recognize every word because she was the reason I wrote them. 2 hours later, just as the balloons were starting to sag and people were packing up folding chairs, someone found me behind the gym. And she was crying. Not the loud, attention-seeking kind of crying she'd mastered over the years, but the real kind. The quiet, desperate sobs of someone who had just seen something she couldn't unsee. Because the thing about truth is that once it's spoken, it becomes a mirror. And Grace, for the first time in her life, had to look into it. It was strange, the way the world felt oddly still as I stood behind the gymnasium, just far enough from the buzz of the reception to feel like I was no longer part of the celebration, and yet close enough to still hear the faint crackle of laughter, the popping of soda cans, the squeak of sandals on asphalt. Like all that joy was happening on another frequency I had long been disconnected from. The sky had that late afternoon gold to it, not the dramatic golden hour photographers chase, but the kind that quietly floods your eyes when you're not paying attention, when you're too busy replaying something that just happened to notice how beautiful the day had become, in spite of everything. I stood with my back against the wall, my heels digging slightly into the dirt, my speech notes crumpled in my hand. Not the one I had written weeks ago, but the one from the lunch receipt. The angry, aching version, still warm from the heat of my palm. And I waited. I didn't know for what or for who, but something in my gut, in that sharp instinctual place that learns over years how to brace for impact, told me someone would come. And not just anyone. When I heard the footsteps, quick and uneven, my body tensed before my brain even caught up, and by the time she turned the corner, I already knew who it was. Grace. Her hair was pulled back the way she wore it when she didn't want to be bothered, her cheeks blotchy and uneven, like someone who had tried and failed to stop herself from crying in public, and her eyes, which had always been the softest shade of green I'd ever seen, were now red-rimmed and wild, like she had been running from something only she could see. For a moment, we just stared at each other, not speaking, not moving, just two women who had spent their whole lives orbiting the same house, the same parents, the same narrative, finally colliding in the one place neither of us had expected. In the shadow of a speech neither of us would ever forget. It was Grace who spoke first, her voice brittle and sharp, a whisper pretending to be a scream. "What the hell was that, Olivia?" I didn't answer right away, because I didn't owe her the kind of explanation she was looking for, the kind that would smooth things over, wrap the whole mess in a bow, and let her walk away feeling like the victim. So I just looked at her, calmly, watching the fury in her expression flicker beneath the weight of something else, shame, maybe, or recognition, or fear. And I said with a softness that felt like a blade, "You heard it, every word." She took a step forward, and for a moment I saw her shoulders drop, like she was going to break, really break, the way people do when they finally realize the damage isn't just collateral, it's personal, it's specific. It has names and dates and receipts. "You humiliated Mom and Dad," she said, but it didn't come out with the venom she wanted. It came out more like a question, as if she wasn't sure anymore who the villain really was. I laughed, quietly, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe she still thought they were the ones who had been wounded. They weren't there, Grace. They were sipping champagne by a pool while I stood on that stage alone. Again, just like every other moment that was supposed to matter. She opened her mouth to argue, but closed it again, and when she did, the tears started. Real tears, not performative, not dramatic, but silent and bitter. The kind that come when the dam finally cracks. And I knew then that despite everything, part of her had never fully understood what she had been given all these years. Not until she saw what it cost me. "I didn't ask for it," she said, her voice so small I barely caught it. "I never asked them to ignore you. I never wanted to be the favorite." And for the first time in years, I let myself believe her, not because I wanted to make peace, but because I finally realized this had never really been about her asking. It had always been about them giving unconditionally, instinctively, habitually to her, because she needed more, because she made noise, because she broke things and cried and demanded and fell apart in ways I was never allowed to. I had made the mistake of thinking that being quiet would earn me grace. All it had earned me was invisibility. "But you never stopped them," I said, not with anger, but with a kind of tired sadness I hadn't known I was carrying. "You let them build their lives around your moods and your victories. You let them forget me." Grace wiped her face with the sleeve of her cardigan, that same pale blue one I remembered her stealing from my closet years ago, a detail that suddenly struck me as painfully symbolic. And she nodded, just once, her eyes downcast. "I didn't know how bad it was." "You didn't want to know," I corrected, "because knowing would mean you'd have to give something up." And then she said something I never expected, something that turned the ground beneath me just slightly sideways. "I used to hear you crying in your room at night," she whispered, "when you thought everyone was asleep. I used to lay there and, I don't know, I didn't know what to do, so I didn't do anything." That admission, quiet, raw, unpolished, hit harder than anything else she could have said, because it was the first time she'd ever acknowledged that she had seen me. Not the perfect version I presented to the world, not the valedictorian, not the calm and collected older sister who always had the answers, but the girl behind the door, crying into her pillow, wondering why love had to feel so conditional. I didn't hug her. I didn't forgive her, but I also didn't walk away. We just stood there, the two of us, in the shadow of everything that had been said, everything that had been hidden, everything that had gone unsaid for far too long. And for the first time, I saw her not as the girl who always got more, but as a mirror of me, shaped by the same parents, the same warped love, the same impossible expectations, just channeled in opposite directions. When I finally turned to leave, she didn't stop me. She didn't ask for a second chance or make a promise she couldn't keep. She just sat down on the steps of the gym, shoulders shaking, mascara bleeding into the collar of a cardigan that wasn't hers. And I walked away, not because I was angry, but because I needed to. Because sometimes the only way to heal is to step away from the story they wrote for you and start writing your own, even if the first chapter begins with your sister sobbing behind a gym. In the days that followed, life moved forward in the same maddening way it always does after something irreversibly human has occurred. Slowly at first, as if testing the new weight of the air, and then all at once, in a rush of ordinary errands and calendar appointments that seemed grotesquely indifferent to the emotional fallout left in their wake. Graduation ended, the stage was disassembled, the photo booths packed up and hauled away, and the rows of folding chairs that had once held parents and friends and neighbors clapping under the blistering sun were now just outlines in the grass, leaving behind only crushed plastic cups, confetti in the wind, and the lingering feeling that something profound had happened. Something that couldn't be undone, couldn't be unsaid, and sure as hell couldn't be ignored. I didn't hear from my parents for 3 full days, which surprised exactly no one, least of all me, because in the Carter household, silence had always been the preferred method of conflict resolution, as if avoiding eye contact could somehow rewrite history or bury shame beneath the comfort of plausible deniability. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, though. It was heavy, humming with tension, like the seconds before a thunderstorm finally breaks open. Except in our case, it never quite rained. It just lingered, stagnant and suffocating. When they finally called, it was my mother's voice on the line, clipped and careful, the same tone she used when speaking to acquaintances she couldn't stand but needed something from. She asked how I was, said she hoped I had enjoyed my big moment, as if the entire thing had been a performance staged for attention, like I was some drama-starved teenager acting out because my spa invitation got lost in the mail. She mentioned that Grace was still upset, as though I had inflicted some unprovoked cruelty on a fragile child rather than spoken aloud a lifetime's worth of truths no one else had the guts to say. I let her talk, not because I owed her the courtesy, but because I needed to hear it. Needed to hear how she framed the story, how she danced around the reality like it was hot coals, and she might burn herself if she stepped too close to the core of it. She never once apologized. Not for missing the graduation, not for the post, not for the years of absence disguised as parenting. Instead, she said something that struck me harder than any insult could have. You could have handled it privately, Olivia. Family matters should stay in the family. That sentence, wrapped in pride, denial, and a pinch of generational poison, was the most honest thing she said because it captured exactly what had gone wrong in our house all those years. The problem wasn't that I had told the truth. It was that I had told it publicly. In their world, pain was meant to be swallowed, not served. Scars were meant to be hidden under sleeves, not pointed to on a stage. And daughters like me? We were supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention were thrown our way, to smile for photos that would later be cropped and captioned like a fairy tale, to keep our rage elegant and our heartbreak invisible. I didn't fight with her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told her that her absence had spoken louder than anything I ever could have said into a microphone, and that if she wanted to be angry at someone, she should look in the mirror. But I doubted she would, because mirrors only work when you're willing to see the truth in them. She hung up soon after that, claiming she had a headache, and I imagined her lighting a lavender candle, sipping lemon tea, and convincing herself she had done her best. That was always her trick, to rewrite the narrative just enough to make herself the misunderstood heroine in a story she refused to read all the way through. As for my father, his silence was colder, sharper, more final. He didn't call, he didn't text, he didn't send an email or write a note, or even leave a voicemail pretending he was too busy. And in that silence, I found the clearest message of all, that his loyalty had never been to me, not really, but to the structure of the family as they had built it. One where Grace was the sun, and I was the scaffolding holding up the scenery. I was never meant to shine. I was meant to support. I wish I could say that after the speech, everything changed. That my parents came to some great revelation, that Grace and I found a way to rebuild. That I felt vindicated and whole and ready to forgive. But the truth is more complicated, more mundane, more real. Things didn't magically get better. They just became more honest. Grace did text me once, a simple message, no punctuation, no emoji. I'm trying. And while I didn't respond right away, or with fanfare, I did save the message. Because in a family like ours, even that was a kind of revolution. I spent the summer preparing for college, packing boxes with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, tossing out old trophies that no one ever remembered to dust, shredding report cards no one had ever framed, and choosing deliberately which pieces of home I would bring with me and which ones I would leave behind. Not just physically, but emotionally. I realized then that healing isn't loud. It doesn't come in one dramatic moment or one perfect confrontation. It comes in the quiet decisions you make when no one is watching. The ones that say, I will not carry this weight another step. I left the framed family photo on my bookshelf, not because I wanted the reminder, but because I needed the contrast. I needed to see it and remember that sometimes the people smiling next to you in the picture are the very same people who left the room when it mattered. I needed to remember that the version of me in that photo, the girl with the forced smile and the hopeful eyes, was gone. She had stood on a stage, told the truth, and walked away from the wreckage without asking permission. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe there's still more to say, more to unravel, more to confront. Maybe someday I'll sit across from my parents in a coffee shop and we'll pretend we're strangers meeting for the first time, learning how to speak without breaking everything in the process. Or maybe we won't. Maybe silence is the truest language we ever shared. Either way, I'll be fine. Because I finally realized that I don't need a round of applause to validate the weight I've carried or the truth I've spoken, and I sure as hell don't need anyone else's permission to call what happened by its real name. That's the thing about echoes. They only exist when something loud enough was said to begin with, and I finally said it.